Jessica, welcome to the podcast. This is a special podcast for me. I've been looking forward to it all week. A chance for me to jump in and have a conversation about what's going on with Peru. But first, let me give you perhaps a slight introduction. You are a human rights lawyer and activist who's been in the field of international law and human rights research for over 10 years. Recently completed your master's at Duke University in international development and social policy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Eric. It's nice to be here.
Now, one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you on is that I've been looking to have a conversation with somebody with exactly kind of what's going on with Peru. In the U.S., our news coverage is more más o menos, more or less, kind of with everything that's been going on. So maybe if you could just start out with the basic question, like what's happening right now in Peru?
Well, there's so many things that are happening right now. Right now we had like almost 3 months of protests, maybe more. Yeah, because they started around December. So yeah, almost 4 months of protest. And it has been mostly focused in the southern regions, specifically Puno, Ayacucho, Apurímac, but there are some protests as well happening in Lima. So yeah, it has been diversified, and I think it has gotten so much attention because of the levels of violence. More than 50 people have died in these protests. And the international organizations that are actually publishing some sorts of manifestations against of what's happening in Peru, because Peru is, the government, it's not actually complying with the rules of use of force that we should be complying. So this is something that has been going on, and the political instability it's been terrible for years. So it's not something that has started in December. It's been going on since 2016 more or less.
Is it fair to say, though, that December might have been a turning point with President Castillo getting impeached from office, that it seems like things became much more violent after that, maybe flashpoint?
Yes, for sure. What happened in December, some people will qualify it as an impeachment, but some other people will qualify it as, we call it autogolpe, which is like self-coup, because it started with Castillo saying that he was going to take the Congress and he was going to take the judicial powers. So he was going to take all the government, and there would be like zero separation of powers. So that started everything.
Thank you for the correction. There's definitely a difference, right, between impeachment and attempted coup. I think it's probably
yeah. He attempted coup, but what is, I don't know, I wouldn't say funny, but what is weird is that he actually attempted this coup without having the support of the military forces. So I haven't really heard about a political coup without the military forces, but he attempted that. So then after that, he tried to escape, but he was taken by the police while he was trapped in the traffic, while he was trying to go to the Mexican embassy to seek for asylum.
That's when I read that story, I know that Lima's traffic is legendary, and I'm coming here from LA, so I can very much empathize with bumper to bumper traffic. Kind of an ironic twist in the story here. Now, Castillo represented, I know that it sounds like Peru has always been, or at least in the past 5 years, has gone through quite a bit of change, and quite a bit of maybe instability. But Castillo represented a significant amount of change from maybe the typical politician. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, for sure. I mentioned earlier that I think that everything started in 2016 because that was the moment in which Pedro Pablo Kuczynski was elected. He ran and won against Keiko Fujimori, and he represented the political establishment and the economic establishment for sure. He was a really well-educated Peruvian, and he had worked for the government before, and he had experience both in the private and public sector. He had an amazing CV, and I don't think there are many Peruvians that could compete actually with his experience. He graduated from both Oxford and Princeton, so we're talking about a highly educated man. But he actually was a disappointment. And I'm just going to generalize it, but I think it was a disappointment for most of Peruvians. When he was elected, people were hopeful. And I think that the southern part of the country that has been historically neglected actually gave him a vote of trust because he was running against Keiko Fujimori. And people didn't want Keiko Fujimori to get elected because she actually promised that she was going, or people believed that she was going to release her father from jail. So with a presidential pardon if she was going to be elected. At the end, Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, on December the 24th, he actually did that. He actually freed Fujimori from jail, which was one of the main reasons for people who didn't believe in his political ideas voted for him. So I think it was a break. It was like, we voted for you, even though you don't represent what we want for our country, and we believed in you. And then after that, we had a series of presidents. And just I can give you an example. My nephew, he has 6 years old. So he was born in 2016 and 2016. And he had so far 6 presidents, which is insane. Of course, some presidents lasted like a week, but still, it's insane that he has 6 years and he had 6 presidents. So yeah, he started with Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, and then it was Vizcarra, and then it was Merino, and then it was Sagasti, and then Pedro Castillo, and now Dina Boluarte.
That is an incredibly high turnover of presidents. Yeah, 6 in 6 years. Now is that I mean, that is a particularly, even for Peru, right? A particularly unstable time. Is it common, or would you say like the people of Peru are just extremely frustrated with the government, and this is kind of driving this high turnover?
No, it's not common. It's not common for sure.
Sure.
And I believe it has legal reasons for this to happen, but also political reasons. I think that there has been like a misuse of the article of the Constitution that actually allows for impeachment. And it has granted lots of power to the Congress to impeach presidents. So in most of these cases, all these transitions and changes has happened because the Congress has impeached the president. But of course, this has led to this instability. But there is also the political component, which is that people are not happy. And we have experienced as a country an economic improvement. So in the macroeconomics, Peru has been growing and growing and growing since for the last 30 years, probably. But what has happened is that this has not been being felt by all the population. So I don't think that people who has been historically impoverished, that hear that the country is growing from an economical perspective, they start to believe what's happening, why I'm still poor, why I still do not have access to education or to health. So there is this feeling of frustration that has been accumulating. So I think it's I don't know, it's a mix of both components. It's this legal component of this misuse of this article that actually allows for impeachment, and this other component that people are not happy.
That's a really interesting call out and perspective, kind of this growing level of frustration. In terms of maybe framing this conversation in terms of like how we got here, is it from maybe my perspective as an outsider looking in, it does seem like there's a distinction between Lima and the rest of the country, economically, geographically, racially. Is that a good way to think about Peru, of a little bit of a distinction or a split here?
Yes, I think that would be accurate because the third part of the population lives in Lima. And there's so many reasons for that, that there is like this huge migration from the provinces to the capital. First of all, because most of the universities are located in Lima. Then most of jobs are in Lima. So if they want to seek professional growth, people have to come to Lima. And that actually happened with both my parents. My mom is from Ayacucho. My dad, he's from Lima, but he's from the southern part of the province. But they had to come to Lima to study and to work. So first of all, that is this component that if you want opportunities, you have to come to the capital. Then I think that there is a disconnection. For example, when we want to learn about what's happening in all the country, at least in Lima, we get this coverage that it's supposed to be from nationwide coverage, but it's not. It's mostly focused on what the government thinks and what's happening in the capital, but we do not get to really understand what are the perspectives, the conversations that are happening elsewhere. So my best friend, she is from Cusco. And I remember when we were young, we were studying in the university, undergrads. She once told me that she felt closer to La Paz than to Lima. And I was outraged and so upset. How dare you say that? But I get it. It's that there is a huge disconnection between Lima and most parts of the country. And yeah, I believe that most the indigenous population lives still in the provinces. And Lima, we consider ourselves more like mestizos. But yeah, I think that even in Lima, you can see that there is like this huge and strong indigenous presence still.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up kind of the indigenous presence as well. It seems like that there's almost a social hierarchy that is, I guess I would call it a legacy from a colonial past, but is that how true is that today? That hierarchy.
I think that still all the social hierarchies from the viceroyalty, they're still here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I used to work there, and you see all the pictures and the names of all the former ministers. They are the same last names that are still in charge, And most of them, of course, are white related families. So I think there's still a social hierarchy. So the whiter you are, the most successful or you might be in this society. And even though Peruvians have like a lot of how do you say, mestizos, we have, I don't know, um it's not like in the US that you actually still see that there are so much differences between the groups. In Peru, it's not that much, but still you
Eh,
can see a hierarchy depending on the color of your skin for sure. For example, I'm half Japanese, and we have a mixture, and like everyone is mixed for sure. We say there's a saying here that it's el que no tiene de inga, tiene de mandinga, which is like if you don't have from the like indigenous native roots, you might have from black roots. So it's like everyone has a little bit of everything. That's something that we say. We kind of embrace that diversity, but at the same time, there are like hierarchies for sure.
and and this is something that was maybe a potential breakthrough with Castillo, right? Coming from these provinces was very much viewed as an outsider in the beginning.
Yes, because for example, he's not the first indigenous president that we had. We had Toledo, Alejandro Toledo, but they have very different backgrounds. So Toledo, when he came into power, he had been U.S. educated, and he had been into these economically successful jobs. While Castillo, he was a teacher in the provinces. So yes, they might be both indigenous, but they represent different populations.
Interesting. And then as Castillo came into power, was it an immediate disappointment, or was there a period of time in which maybe everybody still remained hopeful?
There are many perspectives regarding Castillo. I think that
Okay.
when he won, it was actually for very little. So he
Mm.
didn't have like this overwhelming support for in the country at all. And I think one of the problems is that they both, Castillo and Keiko, represented conservative views. She represented the conservative views from the right, and he represented conservative views from the left, which is odd. But he is this leftist uh, teacher who doesn't believe in LGBTQ rights, and he is a little bit machista. Not a little bit, he's very machista, which is misogynist. So for many people, for example, my perspective as a human rights lawyer, it was depressing and underwhelming since from the moment they both got elected to go to the second round. When it was Castillo versus Keiko, this is done. But many people, when he was elected, still chose to believe, okay, let's give him a chance. And he gave his presidential speech, which was quite accepted. But then when he got to the point in which he had to choose his prime minister, he chose Guido Bellido, who represented his part, the political party he came from, and he was really questionable person. So people started to wonder, what is he going to do, or what is he pretending to do? He didn't give much hope to people who were still hesitant about him.
Mm. I see. Not necessarily a unifying candidate, it sounds like. It's also interesting that you say that the conservative left, it's a really unique phrasing. And I know in the U.S., the Democratic support was given to Castillo, but there were a number of articles that I read, and it was pointing out how odd it was that the
Yes.
U.S. left was also supporting a candidate that was not necessarily left on maybe what would be considered social issues in the U.S. And so it
Yeah.
makes for a very odd relationship, I guess.
I think that
Now,
most people
oh,
think
good.
that when there are left candidates, there has to be progressive. He's not.
Mm, okay.
Yes.
What, and so what about him made him, I guess, a left candidate?
I think that more than being a left candidate, he was against establishment. He was, for example, one of his promises, or one of the party's promises was that we have to get a new constitution because this constitution is not working. And when you ask people why it's not working, people do not know. It's just that the constitution represents something they don't want. But it's more anti-establishment that actually leftist political views. He said, no más pobres en un país rico. It's like no more poor people in this rich country, which kind of represented a leftist point of view. But he didn't have clear guidelines where we're going, how we're going to do this, how we're going to actually change things. So I think that was problematic.
That was something that was pointed out, that I read quite a bit of, is that he, as an outsider with no experience like in the political environment, it sounds like he very much struggled to get things done once he was in government.
Yes, I believe that he didn't surround himself by people who had some sort of experience, maybe because he was actually against the establishment, but I believe that still in the government, you kind of need some sort of continuity, at least from the technical level, not the political level, but the technical level, but there was no continuity. So he surrounded himself with people who didn't have that much experience in government. And that, of course, played against him. And one of his excuses while the time he was president is that he was actually not given a chance because the Congress was always against him. But the problem is that while he was saying that, there were many claims of corruption during his government that not only involved the people who were closer to him, but actually involved him. So it was not that much that he didn't, I mean, it was, of course, that he didn't have experience, that he didn't know how to choose the people who surrounded him, but also that he was involved in many, 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 many scandals.
So I notice when you kind of talk about the run up to the elections, you keep using the candidates' names, Keiko versus Castillo, and not necessarily the political parties of Peru. How strong are political parties and the institutions in Peru?
They are not strong at all, and it's the opposite of what happens in the U.S. I lived in the U.S. in 2020. And I was overwhelmed with the polarization, but it was a clear polarization between two political parties. And it was mostly about the political parties than the candidates. In Peru, that doesn't happen. We do not have strong political parties. That's one of our main problems. So every 5 years, because we have presidential elections every 5 years, there are new political parties, there are new candidates, and when you vote for one of them, it's not because they represent an idea, it's because the candidate doesn't seem as bad as the other ones. That's it. So it's not that you're voting because this candidate represents my political perspective of how things should be done. No. It's just that the other one is worse.
Does that then carry over to once you do get elected? Is it reliant? Are you reliant as a president of Peru? Are you reliant upon the ability to network and maybe build coalitions in order to get bills and kind of get things across and passed?
In theory, yes. In theory, I mean, Castillo actually did the self-coup because it was the third attempt to impeach him. And if he wasn't impeached the first two times, it was because of coalitions. I mean, the political party that he represented of the leftist parties kind of had agreements in the Congress so he wouldn't be impeached. But I guess that he believed that at the third time he was not going to win that one.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, and I guess I've read a few U.S. or American headlines, and they've articulated that the perspective that Castillo's failed coup is often misrepresented by the West or Americans as strong institutions of Peru. Would you agree with that, or have a different perspective?
Could you explain a little bit better the question?
That sure, yeah. That I think that I think that oftentimes it's seen as like I think the headlines in a couple of those articles, that those perspectives, is it's coming from the position that, oh, Peru is going to be more stable once this coup failed, and the reason was because Peru's got these strong institutions that kind of have prevented this coup from happening.
Yeah. I guess that we were proven wrong because,
Sure.
to be honest, when he actually did this, but then he was officially impeached by the Congress, and they claimed that Dina Boluarte was going to be the next president. I thought, as many other people, that will be the end of it. That, okay, now we will have a little bit more stability. And we thought that was going to happen, and that would be it, because even if we had this political instability, our institutions are strong. However, right now, there is so much crisis, and how things are being handled shows that there is actually no balance between the powers. There is a perception right now that the Congress has so much power, because one of the things that people are asking for is for new elections or the reestablishment of Pedro Castillo. And this would happen by one of two ways. First, if Dina Boluarte quits, or if the Congress passes a law calling for new elections. This has been discussed right now several times at the Congress, but they hasn't passed a law on that regard, even though people are dying, even though there is so much violence, even though there is so much troubles from a national and international perspective for the country because of this. And it has gotten to a point in which the Congress right now has a 90% of disapproval. So it's like 9 of 10 Peruvians, out of 10 Peruvians, actually don't think the Congress is doing a good job. And many believe it's because they have right now too much power. And that might be a consequence of what happened with Castillo, because they believe that Dina is actually being, manipulated by them.
It's so I guess one of the things that I would have thought would have happened with Dina Boluarte coming in after Castillo is that she's very much a part of the same party, and maybe I guess I would describe as a candidate that's more in the middle, and that would kind of settle things down. But it looks like that has not happened, or that has clearly not happened, and we've gone the opposite way of more protests, and specifically some violent protests as well.
I think that both Pedro Castillo and Dina Boluarte are a perfect example that we do not have political parties here, because they're just two people that randomly met in a political party, just got together for the elections, and it's not that they actually are in the same tune on what should happen in the country. They were just put together because Pedro Castillo was not even the leader of the political party. The leader of the political party had many cases against him, so he was not a good candidate. They decided to put Castillo because he had a cleaner look than the other one.
Wow. And now, if there were to be elections reheld today, would the makeup of Congress change? Given that they're so unpopular, would a large number be voted out?
This has been discussed because many people are theorizing what would happen if, in either of both alternatives. Let's say Dina quits. So if she quits, then the president of the Congress has to be proclaimed president. But he has the legal obligation to immediately call for elections. But immediately call is like really abstract. You don't have like real dates. So it could be a year, it could be 2 years, and that president might be able to say, okay, but like general elections, it takes time to call for them. So in that case, of course, if there are general elections, I guess that the Congress has to be re-elected as well. In the case that they pass the law, most of the discussion is being also focused on, are the elections only for the president or are general elections like they usually happen every 5 years? And many people in the country, or at least a portion of the country, is kind of concerned because even though we have one of these two ways to go, the political future of the country is not clear. So let's say we get a new Congress. Are we going to be better with this new Congress than with this current one? We don't know. Probably not. Because during the time of Vizcarra, there was a modification of the Constitution that actually didn't allow for a re-election of Congress. So they cannot be re-elected. That changed everything. So let's say we have this congresswoman that has been working for the Congress for 10 years. So she has some kind of knowledge, but now she cannot get reelected because of this law. So we have to elect someone new, someone we don't know, someone that might not have experience in the political arena. That's problematic. That's why there is so much uncertainty about what's going to happen next.
So I think that segues very well into maybe talking a little bit more about these protests. At this point, we're at over 3 months, or just right around 3 months of protests. How have they evolved over time, and kind of what is the end goal of a lot of these the protesters?
Many of these protests are regarding Pedro Castillo, that he should be released, that he should be freed, and that he should be reinstalled as president. So it's more pro-Castillo, some of these positions. Some of the positions are mostly focused on Dina Boluarte has to quit. So what's clear is that what's happening right now, that we have Dina Boluarte as president, is not accepted by the people who are protesting, for sure. And there are some people that are calling to dialogue, for conversations between the government and the protesters. However, what is the legitimacy of the president right now, with more than 50 people being killed in the protest, more than 1,000 people who had been injured in the protest, hundreds that had been detained? So it's very difficult. I don't know if there is right now a room for conversation between this president that already has, in the eyes of many, her hands covered by blood with the protesters. So, yes.
Are the protesters themselves violent, or is the response, the government response, what is kind of creating the violence here?
Okay, I'm going to act here like the devil's advocate. It really depends on who is going to tell you the story. So,
Sure.
many people are saying that protesters are being violent. Some others are saying not all protesters are being violent, but there is like some groups who are violent that are actually creating all this chaos. But there are some others who are protesting for peace. And there are some others who are saying, no, the government is just actually a victim of what's going on. And then there are some others that say that actually the government's response has been violent, deeply repressive. And that's actually the position that many international organizations are adopting, that they are criticizing the response of the government.
That's interesting, because the international community is split, right, in the support of the Peruvian government and Boluarte. I think that I saw the U.S. and Spain are kind of in support, but it seems like many countries in South America are not necessarily in support.
Yeah.
What's driving the split here?
I believe that the political position. So I believe that most leftist parties, most leftist governments are supporting the protesters, and the other countries are supporting Dina Boluarte because she represents, or kind of represents, the right. But I don't think things are black or white in this matter. I believe that... No, please tell me that.
No, it definitely seems like there is a lot of gray here.
Yeah, there are nuances
nuance
on that, and it's problematic just to support one position or another, because people have to take into consideration that if there are deaths, if there are disappearances, if there are alleged rapes, it has to be more than a political position. It has to be a human rights stance on what's going on. So, but at the same time, for example, the support of these other countries, Colombia, Mexico, is actually doing something positive for them. What is the real impact for the protesters? It's difficult, because I think that as most conversations on these kind of topics, at the end it's being portrayed as a movie, right? Like the villain and the good guys, and I don't think it's like that. And I think it's always dangerous to get to that point. You don't get solutions if one is the bad guy and the other one is the good guy. It doesn't allow to see the real problems.
Yeah, right. That there needs to be, I think it sounds like, more compromise and more coming together here. Now, you mentioned a few different human rights violations from that end. Is the nature of these protests such that they've overwhelmed the country and stopped daily life, or is daily life like still happening, both in Lima and maybe in like the southern provinces?
I think that it got to a point at the beginning of the year in which it really stopped many things, especially in some regions. For example, I was going to travel to Cusco in January, but at the end we couldn't because the airport was closed, and we were not sure or certain of what was the level of the violence in the protest, and this is just from a touristic perspective, but for sure, many small commerces were affected during this time. For example, people who normally sell school implements like notebooks or pencils. Normally, they do their small sales during February because we start classes in March. But the big sales, they are from December to January because they sell from one part of the country to the other part of the country. So many people lost their products, lost their incomes, and we're talking about people who actually live by day. So many people who were impoverished already were economically affected by what was going on. So I think it really stopped the country, at least for a couple of months. Right now, there is a feeling that things are moving forward a little bit. It doesn't mean that things are okay. It doesn't mean that the protests have stopped. It doesn't mean that we are in a stable situation right now. No. So, and I wouldn't be surprised that there is a change of events in the next week.
Wow.
So it right now it feels that we are moving forward, but that might change because there is no stability.
Looking forward ahead, and I know it's always very difficult to do, but what needs to happen in order to kind of get back or gain more stability, and like how does this progress and play out?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I have
Sure.
talked about this with many people, and we have been through a lot in the last years, but there is always hope, or there is always some kind of critic that why isn't he doing this? But at this point, we really don't know what should be done to change things, because it has to be apparently one of these two choices that the protesters are giving Dina Boluarte. It's either she quits or either the Congress calls for elections. But it's just like the Congress and Dina Boluarte are just like playing volleyball. Who is going to make that decision while people are still protesting? I don't think that things are going to get calmer and calmer eventually. No, I don't think that. So there is a big change that needs to be made, but nobody is willing to make that change. And when I say nobody, it's like nobody with power. Because right now, the ball is in their hands.
Yeah, that's interesting because it seems like there are several layers of problems and maybe solutions that need to be solved. If Dina Boluarte just calls for new elections on its own, I think that might only be, I guess I would almost refer to it as like a surface level solution.
Yes.
And not necessarily address the deeper underpinnings here.
No, that has been perfectly put. I mean, that's going to just solve what's going on right now. But if we want a real change, there has to be like changes regarding education, health, redistribution, because right now we have just like manifestation of hundreds of years of frustration. So when we had to endure the armed conflict during the 1980s and 1990s, we had almost 20 years of armed conflict. Most people who were killed were the most impoverished ones. And then after that, we were supposed to be growing economically, but these people still have to endure so much. So I get why there is so much anger and so much resentment towards the political authorities, because these are the ones who are actually making the decisions here. And things are not going to change because just because Dina leaves, there is so major changes that needs to be addressed. For example, during the protest, and this is really interesting because there are two perspectives. Some children have died in the ambulances because they were being taken from the provinces to Lima because they needed some emergency, let's say, operation, procedure, etc. And these children died because the roads were blocked. So people were blaming the protesters. Why are they blocking the roads if you have an ambulance and this child just died? But there is like this other counter-argument that say, why does a child need to travel from the provinces to Lima to find decent medical attention? So it doesn't make sense. You see, so these are the layers that are being involved. It's just not one is the bad guy and the other one is the other bad guy. No, it's just that, of course, there is a reason behind it. You feel sad for all the children or the people who were coming in the ambulances, but at the same time, why didn't they have proper medical attention back in their cities? They need to travel hours to just have proper medical attention. That it's insane. Children have to walk kilometers, because I speak in kilometers. I don't speak in miles. They have to travel kilometers to actually go to their schools. So they have to wake up at 4, 5 a.m. in the morning to get to school. And these are the things that need to be addressed. And Pedro Castillo promised that we are going to address that. So he actually represents these changes. But at the same time, did he do anything about that while he was in power? Was any of these emergencies addressed? Because these are emergencies at this point. But he didn't. And most of the news that we're talking about him, we're talking about his the ineptitude of his ministers or of him while he was in power. And I work at the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations last year. When I started working there in April or no, March, I probably had 5 ministers at the end of the year. So
I see the changeover. It's too much.
Exactly. So if we talk about political instability just at the president level, it's already erratic. But if we talk about the instability at the minister level, where the people who are actually running the ministries, it's insane. So there is no possibility for continuation or to get actually things done if you have 5 ministers in a 10-month time period.
And this sounds like a really frustrating situation from the aspect of like, it would be nice to have stability brought back, but like your ambulance example, I feel like is an incredibly potent one. That just by bringing back stability, that doesn't necessarily solve a lot of these problems that are, it seems like, maybe focused on the outside provinces.
Yeah, it's a limited perspective, and the problem is that there's so many layers of discussion, and they do not try to listen to the other one. So I sometimes I listen to these conversations in which people are just criticizing the protesters, and there are even some people that are calling them terrorists, which is an stigmatization. And it's especially hurtful in our country because of our history. So no surprise that someone who is like indigenous, poor, from the provinces, and he is protesting and he is being called a terrorist. And let's take into consideration that these were the people that were the most affected during the terrorist years. So it's an especially hurtful thing to say, and it's being politically used to delegitimize any type of claim. So it's very difficult to actually understand of the other people's perspective if you're just like using this terms to actually deny them any right to express something, because it's a way to deny them an expression, which you just call them terrorists.
Right, and like using that language, as you said, in particular, is going to provoke a pretty strong reaction.
Exactly, because in my country, terrorism is like, it's still a trauma. It's still a really painful trauma that most generations still live. I mean, for sure, my parents, I still suffer with all the things that make me think about it during the 1980s and the 1990s. I'm guessing that my nephews and my nieces, they do not get this feeling, but all the adults and all the people who are actually making decisions in the country, this is a big trauma as a country. So using that word is dangerous, I believe.
It is.
Because it can only call for reaction, but like angry reactions or sad reactions. It doesn't call for dialogue.
Yeah, and it sounds like more dialogue is very much what's needed. Jessica, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. This has been incredibly insightful, and you've done an excellent job of unpacking like an incredibly dynamic and really like moving issue. Any closing thoughts? Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, thank you so much for actually dedicating one of your episodes to what's going on in Peru, because I believe that many people either do not have any information of what's happening, or they have a biased information of what's happening. And I think it's important that everybody understand that there are nuances, that nothing is black or white. I think that in any social problem, nothing is black and white, but especially here. And I believe that there has to be more empathy about other people's problems and other countries' problems. And it just starts with understanding why might be this happening. And if there is like a little bit of information coming from here, I'm just going to be very happy.
Well, there's definitely a great perspective that you're providing. Thank you again. It was great to have you on.
Thank you, Eric.